Most of us know that the new GM LT V8 engines are the up-and-coming engines in the performance world, and there's a lot of reasons for that. These engines are direct injected, they're very strong, they have strong bottom ends with cross-bolted 6-bolt main caps. They have continuous variable valve timing and other technology that allows them to be not only efficient, but drivable, meaning in some of the earlier generation of engines, you could get horsepower, but you lost drivability. The small block Chevy can trace its roots back to the 1950s and earlier. For the day, it was an advanced engine. It was relatively high compression overhead valve, but by the 1990s, it got long in the tooth. GM did make some improvements like adding throttle bodies, roller cams, serpentine belts, but the reality was it was an old architecture and it had to be replaced. The other issue with the earlier engines was transmissions. While the 3-speed transmissions were strong and worked well, they were not very efficient. They went to the overdrive 4-speed transmissions and they worked better, and for that day they were pretty advanced. But today we have much better technology than the earlier 3 and 4-speed transmissions. So GM made a major shift in technology when they introduced the Gen 3 engines in the mid-2000s. These engines had all aluminum construction, relatively high compression, lightweight, and they were powerful. Even a 5.3 Gen 3 engine was over 300 horsepower, when if you look back at a K motor, a 5.7 liter engine from the small block days, we're talking about 200 horsepower or less. The Gen 3 engines were more efficient than the earlier small blocks. Combustion chamber technology and higher compression allowed the Gen 3 engines to not only outperform the earlier small blocks, but to get better economy and drivability. The Gen 4 engines are really an extension of the Gen 3 engines. We added technology like variable valve timing, which allows you to have more power on the bottom end with better drivability, meaning a better idle while still maintaining top-end performance. They added active fuel management, which allows the motor to essentially cut its displacement in half and enjoy the benefits of the smaller displacement engine. The Gen 4 engines became extremely popular, especially the LS3. The LS3 became pretty much the standard engine around the world, not only for engine swap, but for racing events. The LS3 was simple, it was strong, and it was powerful. There's a whole slew of Gen 4 engines with different technology: variable valve timing, active fuel management, flex fuel, intake valve tuning, etc. Along with the new engines came new transmissions. The 6L80 took the 4L60, 4L60 70 to a new level also. Friction was reduced. These are clutch-to-clutch transmissions. The gear ratio diversity spread, we're talking 4-to-1 low and about 0.66 overdrive. And this is how manufacturers are squeaking a little more economy out, is by adding more gears to the transmission and keeping the engine in its power band longer. And they're also expanding that power band, and that's why the LTs are so important, because the LTs take horsepower and torque to a new level given the size, displacement of the engine, and the architecture. Let's take a look at the 5.3 liter LT V8 engine. This is the L83, which comes in many of the SUV and trucks starting in 2014. These engines are really a dichotomy. These engines are old architecture. The standard V8 design with overhead valve has been around for a long, long time. But GM has incorporated modern technology into this old design. We have high compression, 11-to-1 and higher. Cylinder pressure is where it's at, and that's what these LTs have. By having high compression and continuous variable valve timing, these engines can put out tremendous amount of torque. When you combine that with a transmission with a lot of gears, that does lead to not only performance but efficiency. This engine has friction-reducing technology like a one-way bearing in the alternator, variable displacement AC compressors that use less energy. You can see from this L83 picture that we're running a vacuum pump for the brakes. A mechanically driven vacuum pump has some advantages because as long as that engine is turning, you're going to have vacuum to your brake booster. You don't need an electric booster pump like some of the JKs have, because they have a small displacement engine, and when they're under a load they lose their intake vacuum and then you lose your brakes. These engines will maintain proper braking even at low RPMs. And speaking of low RPMs, these LTs can idle in the 400 to 500 RPM range. Idling lower means you save gas, but more importantly, it's the drivability. When you're sitting at a stoplight, you don't have that rump of a 500 horsepower engine. Moving into the 6.2 LT, these engines are pushing 450 to 500 horsepower, but they're rivaling the drivability 400 horsepower Gen 4 engines. Moving on with the technology, we have direct injection, which is huge. And when you combine that with CVVT, which allows you to phase the cam wherever you want, whenever you want, that means we have really good control of cylinder pressure. You combine that with a 4-cylinder mode, which allows you to reduce the displacement of the engine, and that leads to not only economy, but performance. So even though we have an old-fashioned overhead valve V8 engine, we have modern technology that we could not incorporate even 20 years ago. The amount of computing power designed to run these engines is well beyond anything that we had in the past. The new E92 Gen 5 LT controller has direct injector drivers, so it's a large footprint computer. It's got a lot going on inside of it. And just like the Gen 4 engines, the Gen 5 engines use a separate TCM, or transmission control module. On the 6-speed transmissions, which the Gen 5s can run, they are internal to the valve body. On the 8-speed transmissions and the 10-speed transmissions, they are external, meaning they're mounted in the engine compartment and can be replaced without removing the valve body. Let's take a look at the Gen 5 LT-1 engine. This is the engine that comes in the Camaro and the Corvette and will most likely become the most popular swap engine because, one, it's available through GM Performance as a new crate motor, and two, the prices have dropped dramatically. This LT-1 engine, with all of its technology, its direct injection and CVVT, can be had in many areas now for less than the simple Gen 4 LS3. So the LT-1 at some point will take its place, and there's no reason it shouldn't. This engine puts out more power, more torque, with better drivability than the LS3 did. The LS3 is a simple engine, so for racing applications it still has its place. But in a street vehicle or a heavy JK, this LT-1 does an excellent job. We've been doing the LT swaps now for 2 years, and I can say that the LT-1 with the 8-speed is one of my favorite combinations. It's a little difficult to describe, but having the engine with so much torque at low RPM and having so many gears to keep you in the power band means touching the throttle anywhere in the power band results in instant acceleration. There's no longer waiting for the transmission to downshift with a delay. The cam phases and brings that power right in. The transmission, having close gearing or close spacing, is always ready to accelerate. It really is a different sensation than the earlier engines, especially with the 3, 4, and 5-speed transmissions. So this is going to be the combination, I feel, for the next 5 years, if not for the next decade. Speaking of transmissions, I think the 8L90 has taken over from the 6L80. When you look at the production vehicles, more and more are using the 8-speed versus the 6-speed for obvious reasons. The 8L90 has a lower first gear and a higher overdrive. Not by much, but a little bit. And then it's got more gears in between, which means GM can squeak out a little bit more economy and power by keeping that engine in its power band. You will experience more shifting, but I can say that the tuning on these transmissions has got better and better, and they're almost shifting like 1-speeds now, where you can barely perceive the shift. The 10-speed transmission even takes it a step further. Most of you know that GM and Ford have got together and developed a 10-speed transmission. We look forward to working with that transmission because I really don't see us going much more than 10 speeds in these JKs. But if you look back just 8-10 years ago when 4 and 5 speeds were the normal, now we're going to 10 speeds. We're running double the number of forward gears. And when you combine that with the technology of today's engines, we're going to see performance and economy numbers that the early V6s and the early V8s couldn't come near. Let's take a quick look at a chart comparing the LT1 to the LS3. They're both 6.2-liter engines. The LS3 is rated at about 430 horsepower and the LT1 about 460 horsepower. But horsepower is really not where it's at for me. What it's about is torque. Torque is what moves you. Horsepower is what keeps you there. Look how much torque the LT motor has just off 1,000 RPM. That torque is going to move your JK. If you're off-road and you have a 6,000-pound JK, it's that torque that's going to make you go over that obstacle with ease. You don't have to rev the motor up like a V6. Even if you're going up a steep grade in the highway, that extra torque is going to keep you in that taller gear. It's going to keep you in closed loop longer. It's going to help you get better efficiency and economy. Now, considering both these engines are the same displacement, this is a pretty significant improvement. And when we combine that with more gears in the transmission, what we end up having is an engine that has more torque, more horsepower, and stays in its power band longer because the transmission allows it to do that. And this is how manufacturers are squeaking a little bit more efficiency and economy out of these engines while still maintaining horsepower. On the modding front, the aftermarket is catching up with the LT engine. The LS engines were very well supported, superchargers, camshafts, intake, whatever you wanted. Now let's take a look at this transmission chart. The transmission is a critical part of the swap. In the early days, running the 3 and 4 speed transmissions really inhibited these engines. Going to the 5 speeds helped, but the 5 speeds are still lacking in my opinion compared to the modern transmissions like the 6, 8, and 10 speeds. If you look at the 4L60, which was an early GM electronically controlled transmission, you'll see that it has a 3.06 first gear and a 0.7 overdrive for an overall spread of about 2.36. That spread is very important because it indicates how well the engine can apply the torque that it has to the ground. The larger that number, the easier it is for the engine to stay in its power band and apply that torque to the ground. If we move over to the 545 RFE, you'll notice that it's actually slightly less than the 4L60. The 545 wasn't exactly the most efficient transmission. The WA580 was an improvement, and you can see that the spread is about 2.76. We really take a leap up with the 6L80. Notice that it's 3.36 spread. This not only indicates that we have a tall overdrive of 0.67, but we have a low first gear of 4.03 to launch a heavy JK out of the hole. In addition, the 6L80 introduced technology like clutch-to-clutch and low friction for low heat and to allow the transmission to be more efficient. In fact, GM rated most of the 6L80 equipped vehicles similar to the manual transmission counterpart. When we had the 4-speed automatics and a manual transmission, the manuals always had better economy, 1 to 2 miles to the gallon better, but with the 6L80 it was pretty much even. Now if we move over to the 8L90, we're nearing 4 to 1 gear spread. You can see that 4.56 low to launch a heavy JK with 40s off the line, and then a 0.65 overdrive to keep you cruising at low RPM on the highway. And then if we step over to the 10L90, we can see that that takes that gear spread and puts it over 4. So now we have a 4.7 first and a 0.64 tenth. Now, is there a dramatic difference between the 3.91 and the 4.06? Not really, but where there is a difference is when you're at part throttle cruising around, the engine can stay in a gear that more effectively allows it to apply torque to the ground. By doing that, you get better throttle response and better economy because the engine is running under ideal conditions. My experience is you don't notice this so much with the lighter JKs, but with the heavier JKs that have 40s or 42s, 1 tons, all that, the 8-speed transmission really helps launch that JK and keep it in its power band while it's trying to haul all that weight and fight the aerodynamic forces. So what we're looking at with the LTs is a combination of technologies between the engine and the transmission. Make the engine as efficient as possible. Go to direct injection. Go to continuous variable valve timing. Go to high compression for high cylinder pressure. Combine that with torque management that works with the transmission to most effectively apply that power to the ground to get you maximum economy and performance. The Gen 4 engines combined with the 6L80 still makes an excellent combination. They are efficient, they outperform the V6 by a wide margin, they have excellent power, throttle response, linear throttle response, unlike a supercharger or turbocharger. They're very reliable, predictable, and lower cost. So the LS still has its merits. The LT is the future, in my opinion. We've actually got many LT builds going on in-house, so we'll see you soon with another video.